Welcome to the State of Mind virtual speaker series. This series has been developed to provide education and support to youth, caregivers, and educators during this challenging time. This series is a collaboration between two local nonprofits, 1 in 5 and MindPeace, and various community mental health partners. We're glad you're here to educate yourself and to learn how to keep your brain in a healthy state of mind.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for the State of Mind speaker series brought to you by 1 in 5 and MindPeace. My name is Jen Wright from Real Human Performance.
And I'm Meriden McGraw from Meriden Mental Wellbeing. And today we are going to present an introduction to mindfulness and how we might apply mindfulness in our day-to-day lives. We are excited to be here with you today, and Jen's going to pull up some slides for us so we can start talking about what mindfulness is. So this definition of mindfulness is from a man called Jon Kabat-Zinn. So you may have heard of mindfulness, you may have read articles about mindfulness, tried it on an app. One of the founding fathers of mindfulness in the West is Jon Kabat-Zinn, and he brought a lot of these techniques over from Eastern countries and Eastern traditions in the 70s to UMass. So he worked at UMass, introduced these techniques to some of his patients who had chronic pain, chronic depression, weren't getting better. He saw results and he decided to expand the techniques to the general population to help individuals cope with stress. So this is his definition, and it's mindfulness is the awareness that emerges through paying attention in a particular way on purpose in the present moment, here and now, and non-judgmentally to the unfolding of experience moment to moment. So the way that I like to remember that is intention, attention, and attitude. So we set the intention, we're very aware, we're intentional to pay attention to whatever is happening in the present moment in a non-judgmental fashion. So intention, attention, attitude. And often what's hardest for us as humans is that last part. So when we can bring our mind into focus, when we focus in on the present moment, what's happening, it can be hard for us to use that aspect, that attitude of non-judgment. So mindfulness is really a process. It's an ongoing, lifelong practice. Jen and I have both been practicing for a number of years, and every single day it continues to be a practice where we learn something, and we're constantly evolving and trying to increase this moment-to-moment awareness and intention. So this is a little diagram that we like to use, and it compares mindful to mindful. So 2 L's and 1 L. And on the left, you can see what most of us experience day to day. So we, as a country, as a society, as individuals, are experiencing higher and higher levels of busyness, of stress, of commitment. And of course, with recent events, with COVID-19, we're experiencing more and more of this. And sometimes our mind can feel like this little guy on the left. Everything's happening all at once. And often we can operate in this place of autopilot. So I know many of you can probably relate to misplacing your keys, driving to the grocery store and not remembering how you drove there, doing things on autopilot, having a conversation with your spouse or kid or friend and saying, what did that person say? I don't remember, right? So we operate a lot of times out of this idea that our mind is very full, or this state of being. Our mind is very full, but we're actually operating on autopilot. So the way I like to think of mindfulness is simply the opposite of autopilot. It's bringing ourselves into the present moment, into what is, with awareness, so we can really live in the here and the now. And Jen, do you want to walk us through this checklist?
Sure. We use the information derived from Jon Kabat-Zinn to create this checklist to walk us through how to disrupt the autopilot. Sometimes it's the autopilot experience itself when we realize, what have I been listening to? What did that person say? Then that itself is the clue or the cue that we've been elsewhere. We've been disoriented. We might have traveled to the past. recalling, recollecting some event in the past, or maybe we've traveled out to the future, the uncertainty of the future events. But either way, we are disoriented. We've lost our orientation to this present moment. And so that in and of itself can be the cue to saying, hey, let's reset. So we purposely pay attention. We use autopilot awareness as an indicator that we can reset. Then we reset, we reorient to this present moment, wherever we are in time, and non-judgmentally observe what is present with us in this moment. Resetting and refocusing our attention, redirecting it as many times as we need to throughout the day is part of the skillfulness until it becomes a way of being instead of a way of doing. So pay attention on purpose, reset and refocus. Do this non-judgmentally as many times as necessary throughout the day. And that will lead to a way of practicing applying mindfulness. And Merritt and I like to talk offline and online about how mindfulness is often misunderstood. That it's not about being calm all the time. It's not about thinking positive thoughts and as being a positive, upbeat person all the time, but it's really being present with what is in the moment. So a lot of the moments we arrive to, we've been disoriented because we're triggered to think of something that's familiar. And other times we arrive to a present moment thinking, oh gosh, this is really uncomfortable. There's a discomfort in my body, or discomfort with recycled thoughts, for example. And so mindfulness is not about dulling our experience, dulling the senses or the self. It's really about paying attention to what arrives, what we arrive with. And so that mindfulness can help us create not only this present moment awareness, but a knowledge of what makes us tick, what gets our goat and who gets us there. It's an expansion of our awareness so that we can be the fullest version of ourselves, the most skillful version of self in the day to day and throughout the day. So going back to this notion of Jon Kabat-Zinn and his research, you mentioned this, Merritt, in the beginning, that Jon Kabat-Zinn has been practicing this for decades and researching it with chronic stress, chronic conditions, chronic pain, and he's seen some really amazing outcomes. We wanted to post a few of these outcomes because I think they can be relatable in our day-to-day life. Research outcomes related to mindfulness is this, that our perceived stress and our perceived pain can decrease with utilizing mindfulness strategies. Stress-related disorders like anxiety, also depression and just ruminating thoughts can be managed with mindfulness skills. Mm-hmm. What also has been seen in Jon Kabat-Zinn's research and others, ourselves as mind-body researchers, is that self-compassion increases our ability to observe neutrally how we think about ourselves, how we think about others, how we react to certain aspects of life. The self-compassion is expanded, and thus that gives a little boost to our mood, not only from the way that we can manage our mental resiliency, but also with the neurochemicals that are produced from this new way of thinking, this new way of being. Some of the side effects from a functional standpoint is increased concentration and focus. And from the human side or humanness of not only increased self-compassion, but also compassion towards others and empathy, the ability to experience, to really listen to what someone else is going through their experience without necessarily adding on our own and projecting our own experience on top of that which we are listening to.
Yeah, so as Jen mentioned, we now know from research that mindfulness isn't just this feel-good, touchy-feely practice. It actually can help us with a number of things in our lives. And the research that I'm most fascinated by is the brain science and the brain research that's been done with mindfulness. So there was a team of scientists in British Columbia that did extensive research on mindfulness in the brain, did fMRI studies, so brain scans, and they found with consistent mindfulness practices that up to 8 regions of our brain can change. So we know now that our brains can change throughout the duration of our lives. And what's really exciting is that mindfulness is one way to rewire our brains, to rewire old patterns so we can see things like Jen was saying, increased focus, increased concentration, empathy, etc., decreased stress. And the two parts of the brain that I think are particularly interesting and great as an introduction to this work are the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So you can think of the amygdala as our fight or flight response part of the brain. It's our reptile part of the brain. So it was the first part of the brain, or one of the first parts of the brain, formed thousands of years ago. And it's an essential part of our brain when we're in life or death situations. So if we step into the street and a car comes at us and we need to quickly jump out of the way, that's our amygdala. We need our amygdala to fire in that moment. However, in our society, we're operating a lot out of our amygdala, even when things are not life or death. So we're in these knee-jerk reaction stress states in the sympathetic nervous system, if you will, the gas pedal of our body and nervous system. And what we want to do, what we can do with mindfulness, is calm down the nervous system, trigger what's called the parasympathetic nervous system, pause, and access the prefrontal cortex. So you can think of the prefrontal cortex as your computer, your executive functioning, decision making. Again, the part of our brain we want to operate out of the majority of our time, especially when we're having communication, making decisions, all of those things in our lives. So what we see, and again, what I think is really cool, is that the amygdala actually shrinks and the prefrontal cortex grows. The gray matter around that area of the brain grows when we practice mindfulness consistently. And a lot of people ask us, what is consistently? What does that mean? So we need to practice about 10 to 20 minutes a day for 8 weeks on average to start to see changes in the brain. That being said, if you're listening to this video and you've never practiced mindfulness before, which we will do in a minute, please do not go home and try to practice 20 minutes. You will hate it and you will quit because it is a new thing and you won't be used to it. So you may work your way up to that 10 minutes a day, 20 minutes a day in the future. But Jen and I would always advise for habit formation, please just start with 60 seconds, do that for a week, and then maybe go up to 2 minutes. But again, I think the brain science is particularly interesting. You can find lots of research and lots of literature out there if you're interested in learning more about this, but it gives us a really tangible sense of what's happening when we practice these skills consistently.
And one of the two skills that we'll be building today are addressing both the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. If we think about a top-down approach, the prefrontal cortex speaking to the brainstem, we use mindfulness. And when we're talking about the brainstem speaking up from a bottom-up approach, the brainstem speaking to the PFC, we're working practices like breathing techniques and orienting ourselves. And we have found that a dual approach is where real lasting change happens. Not only do we use our mental thinking mind to address the right sizing of the amygdala, but also work directly with the amygdala and give it some conditions so that it feels met and satisfied and in a place of relative safety, so that it can, as Merida mentioned, do things like think or process, figure tasks out. Mm-hmm. So our practices today will be through that light, not only from the top-down approach, but also the bottom-up, using orientation and breathing techniques.
Yeah, stress and the amygdala in general get a bad rap. So we hear all the time, I want a stress-free life. I don't want any stress. How can I get rid of stress? And stress is actually not a bad thing. Stress is our friend. We need a certain level of stress in our life to be motivated to get things done. We need the amygdala to jump out of the way of oncoming traffic, right? We need these aspects of our life, but sometimes we can have too much stress, too much amygdala activation. And that's where these techniques can really help balance us out, as Jen was saying.
That's a really good point. Because stress, a little bit of hormetic stress is just enough to build, to increase our capacity. It's when we expand and go beyond that capacity that we start to meet that threshold and realize that, hey, listening to a mindfulness seminar could have some usefulness, or practicing it in a way that is titrating it, like practicing while we're brushing our teeth. Just these small ways that are accessible in our day, rather than sitting it down for 20 minutes and focusing solely on watching our thoughts. So we're going to set ourselves up for success and make some lasting change just by following these simple, not always easy practices. So let's get into it. We'll begin with a practice called orienting. I mentioned quite simply that when our mind wanders off, and it does that, the mind wanders, and sometimes our mind can wander quite frequently. When the mind wanders off, we get disoriented. We've lost our proverbial way in this moment. And so we'll use that simple definition as a way to just say, hey, I get disoriented. And then allow ourselves the opportunity to reorient in this moment. We do that by literally noticing where we are. So when you're ready, and if it feels all right, I invite you to notice how you're supported. Notice very clearly that which supports you. Maybe it's a chair, car seat, couch, however you're set up. I invite you to notice that which supports you. Survey your body from the crown of the head to the soles of the feet, seated in your space. Notice any tensions that you hold on to. Notice anything tense or tight right off the top. Tending to these tensions, allowing your body to ease into the chair, to the floor. Allow Earth's materials to hold you. Say hello to your mind. Maybe thank it for all of its efforting of recent time. Maybe acknowledge what it's tending to right now. Gently guide the mind to notice Earth's materials that support you beneath your sitting bones, legs, and feet. Sink down into these supports, and as you yield to them, give a little press to the feet. Notice what rebound effect there is that can support you, lift you, as you take up your space. If you haven't already, I invite you to gently blink the eyes open and take a look around the space that you've set up in. Move with slower pace than you might normally. Really seeing that which is in your space. Say a plant, a picture frame, a pen. And as you notice the objects that exist in your space, you notice the fact that you indeed are still breathing. Come back to the awareness of the computer screen, your phone screen. I invite you to follow one inhale in and one exhale out. Bringing the hands in front of the heart center, rubbing the palms back and forth together. Notice the sound that you create. Trust that. Bringing the warmth of the palms to the eyes. Allow your eyeballs, the optic nerve, an opportunity to rest to receive this care, the warmth from your palms, releasing the hands whenever you're ready, reorienting to your device screen. This is one example of an orientation practice. The way that we can apply it is literally room to room. If you are staying in your home most of the time, when you go from one room to the next, I invite you to take a look around when you arrive to your kitchen. We're so used to just mindlessly or on autopilot going from one place to house. Or as you transition, you go out into public, whether to a store, into your school, into your classroom. Take a moment to really arrive. It's amazing what we can arrive with, kind of carry our preconceptions, our preconceived notions, all of our experiences. And some can be very helpful, and others are more baggage-like. It can be detrimental. So a way to put a pause, a mindful pause, and to really arrive and be present is to take a look around, to get centered, to get situated, really allow the nervous system to organize into this new place that we have arrived.
Certainly. John, one of the things that I like to do is assess my five senses. So if I find that my mind is wandering a lot or I'm disconnected from where I'm at, or if I walk into a new space, what are five things I see, four things I hear, three things I smell or feel, taste, smell, etc. So using all five senses and noticing if those senses help bring you into the moment.
It's such a rich point because we access the mind through the senses. Mm-hmm. And when our senses are constantly being pinged by what we hear, by what we see and smell, and even our senses can get hyper vigilant. That's our mind becomes hyper vigilant because our senses are taking in so much sensory input. And so when we tend to the senses in this methodical way, we let the brain and the nervous system know that there's organization here. We're capable. We're capable of taking in that which we're exposed to, and then we can literally feel more ready, our capacity honed.
Love that.
So with that, the breath practice, Erin and I, breathing.
So we are going to hop in to a breath practice, and it is the foundational or one of the foundational formal mindfulness practices that we use. So when we talk about mindfulness, there are a number of ways to practice, and I like to bucket them into formal practices and informal practices. And formal practices are what we're about. What we're about to do is one formal practice, but they're actually taking time, carving time out of your day to do a formal practice. And then informal practices are what Jen and I just talked about. So walking into a room, becoming aware of what is there, noticing your feet on the ground as you walk. They're things that you do throughout your day that fit into your day, bring mindfulness to what you're doing. The more that we practice seated or walking formalized practices, the easier it is for us to access mindfulness in our day-to-day lives, those moment-to-moment lives. The easier it is for us to use, embody, and practice those informal techniques. So again, this is the foundational formal practice that we teach. So go ahead and find a nice comfortable position again. And I would invite you, if you've crossed your legs, to go ahead and uncross them and take the soles of your feet to the ground beneath you. And find a nice tall, long spine, not too stiff, but straight. And maybe you roll the shoulders down and back away from the ears. And perhaps you let your palms rest on your thighs or your knees, wherever they're comfortable. And then if it feels okay for you in this moment, perhaps you gently shut the eyes. And if that doesn't feel good for you today, just take a soft gaze downward, blurring the vision. And just start to settle into stillness. So notice what this stillness feels like. Maybe it feels different or foreign from the rest of your day thus far. And again, as Jen instructed previously, notice your feet on the ground beneath you, perhaps raising all 10 toes and lowering all 10 toes. Maybe raising the heels and lowering the heels. Imagining that you're pressing all four corners of the feet into the ground beneath you. And perhaps you even imagine the ground, the floor, the earth pressing back, supporting you in this moment. And then bring attention to the top of the head. Imagine the weight of the head melting into the shoulders, shoulders melting into hips, hips into knees, knees into ankles, out through the bottom of the feet. The entire body aligned, grounded here in this space, this present moment. And then take a moment to briefly notice any sounds that you hear. And then bringing your awareness inward, bring attention to the breath. So notice how the breath enters the body. Perhaps it's in through the nostrils and out through the nostrils or the mouth. Notice what this feels like. Perhaps notice what this feels like as if you've never noticed it before. And then notice where the breath wants to go in the body in this moment. So maybe it's by the collarbone, the upper chest. Maybe it's by the side lungs, the rib cage, or maybe the breath travels all the way down to the low belly. Just noticing. What is my breath like in this moment? One inhale flowing into the exhale. And then for the next 30 seconds or so of silence, that's all I promise. Simply watch the breath. Meaning, pay attention solely to the inhale and the exhale. Notice what it feels like, the sensations of breathing. And every time the mind wanders, which it will, just notice. My mind is wandering, I'm human. I'm thinking about the future, the past. There's an urge to fidget, boredom, whatever it is. And gently and kindly come back. Come back to what you're focusing on, the breath. Again and again and again. And then just notice without judgment. What was that experience like? Was the mind especially busy today? Any physical sensations you noticed? Any emotions that arose? Again, practicing non judgment, just noticing what is. What was that experience like for you? And then I invite you to take one deep, deep inhale through the nose. And one deep, long exhale out through the mouth, sighing everything away. And then, whenever you're ready, bring slight movement into your fingers and your toes. Returning back to this moment, taking as much time as you need to gently blink the eyes open if they're closed. Coming back to your computer screen, your phone, your tablet, this presentation. So, Jen, I think we lost our slides. If you want to bring them back up, or maybe that was purposeful, I'm not sure. But that was a breath meditation. And yes, here it is. Perfect. So, what we do with the breath meditation, and really it can be an anchor meditation. So, if you found focusing on the breath just wasn't for you, you can focus on anything that's consistently happening in the present moment. So it might be a sound, a body part, a word you repeat, an object that you see in front of you that you focus on. But you choose one thing to focus on completely. And again, we most commonly use the breath. Why? Because it's always with us. It's consistent, we hope, moment to moment. And we focus on that one thing, and then we notice the mind is wandering. So the purpose of this exercise is not to clear the mind, not to stop the mind wandering. It's simply to notice the mind is wandering and when it is wandering, and come back to what we're focusing on again and again and again. So Jen and I have both practiced for a number of years now, and still some days I sit and my mind wanders 5,000 times. It feels like in 20 minutes. And I notice it's wandering and I come back. I notice it's wandering and I come back. And that's the action, that's the technique, is just to notice and then practice that non-judgment. Of course, my mind is wandering. I'm human. That's what my brain is designed to do. Let me come back to what I'm focusing on. And you will go through this pattern again and again and again. And this is the very basis of formalized mindfulness meditation practice.
A special thank you to our State of Mind speakers and to you for joining us. More videos and educational resources can be found at 1in5's website. If you feel like you or your child is in need of professional support, therapists are available. Please refer to Mindpeace's school-based or community resource page. For a mental health crisis or emergencies, patients and families are encouraged to contact their current mental health provider first. This allows the mental health provider who knows your child best to provide support and direction. If your child does not have a mental health provider and they are experiencing a non-life-threatening mental health crisis, you are encouraged to contact the Psychiatric Intake Response Center at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. 513-636-4124. Call 911 or go to the emergency department if you are experiencing a medical emergency, a life-threatening mental health crisis, or are directed to go there by a medical provider. This will help limit the spread of COVID-19 in our community and allow our emergency departments to care for patients with the most critical needs first.